Moll Flanders by Defoe. My true name is so well known in the records at Newgate and in the Old Bailey, and there are some things of such consequence still depending there, relating to my particular conduct, that it is not to be expected I should set my name, or the account of my family, to this work. Perhaps after my death it may be better known. At present it would not be proper. No, not though a general pardon should be issued, even without exceptions and reserve of persons or crimes. It is enough to tell you that as some of my worst comrades, who were out of the way of doing me harm, having gone out of the world by the steps and the string, as I often expected to go, knew me by the name of Moll Flanders. So you may give me leave to speak of myself under that name, till I dare own who I have been, as well as who I am. I have been told that in one of our neighbour nations, whether it be in France or where else I know not, they have, on order from the king, that when any criminal is condemned either to die or to the galleys or to be transported, if they leave any children, so they are immediately taken into the care of the government. Had this been the custom in our country, I had not been left a poor desolate girl without friends, without clothes, without help or helper in the world, as was my fate. My mother was convicted of felony for a certain petty theft. Being found quick with child, she was respited for about 7 months, in which time, having brought me into the world, she obtained the favour of being transported, and left me about half a year old, and in bad hands, you may be sure. The first account that I can recollect was that I had wandered among a crew of those people they call gipsies. It was at Colchester in Essex that those people left me, and being taken up by some of the parish officers, I gave an account that I came into the town with the gipsies. I was now in a way to be provided for. Compassion moved the magistrates of the town to order some care to be taken of me, and I became one of their own. In the provision they made for me, it was my good hap to be put to nurse, as they call it, to a woman who was indeed poor, but had been in better circumstances. This woman also had a little school, which she kept to teach children to read and to work. But that which was worth all the rest, she bred them up very religiously. I was continued here till I was 8 years old, when I was terrified with news that I should go to service. I put me into a great fright, and I told my nurse that I believed I could get my living without going to service, for she had taught me to work with my needle and to spin worsted. And in short, I did nothing but work and cry all day. One day my nurse came into the room where all we poor children were at work. She sat down just over against me, and after a while she began to talk to me. "Thou foolish child," says she, "thou art always crying. What dost cry for?" "Because they will take me away," say I, "and put me to service. And I am but a little girl, and I can't do it." "What, would you be a gentlewoman?" "Yes," says I, and cried heartily. Some time after this, going to wait on the mayor, and talking of such things as belonged to her business, at last my story came up, and my good nurse told Mr. Mayor the whole tale. He was so pleased with it that he would call his lady and his 2 daughters to hear it, and it made mirth enough among them, you may be sure. And all this while, my good old nurse, Mrs. Mayoress, and all the rest of them did not understand me at all, for they meant one sort of thing by the word gentlewoman, and I meant quite another. For alas, all I understood by being a gentlewoman was to be able to work for myself, whereas they meant to live great, rich, and high, and I know not what. I was now about 10 years old, and began to look a little womanish and very mannerly, and as I had often heard the ladies say I was pretty, and would be a very handsome woman, so you may be sure that hearing them say so made me not a little proud. By the time I was 12 years old, At last, one of the ladies took so much fancy to me that she would have me home to her house for a month, she said, to be among her daughters. This was prudently managed enough, and I went to the lady's house. But I was so pleased there with the young ladies, and they so pleased with me, that I had enough to do to come away, and they were as unwilling to part with me. However, I did come away, and lived almost a year more with my honest old woman, and began now to be very helpful to her. About the time that I was 14 years and a quarter old, my good old nurse fell sick and died. I was then in a sad condition indeed, for poor good woman being buried, the parish children she kept were immediately removed by the church wardens. The school was at an end, and the children of it had no more to do but just stay at home till they were sent somewhere else. Now I was a poor gentlewoman indeed, and I was just that very night to be turned into the wide world. But it seems that some of the neighbours who had known my circumstances took so much compassion of me as to acquaint the lady in whose family I had been a week, and immediately she sent her maid to fetch me away to her home. And here I continued till I was between 17 and 18 years old. And here I had all the advantages for my education that could be imagined. Thus far I had had a smooth story to tell of myself, and in all this part of my life I not only had the reputation of living in a very good family, but I had the character, too, of a very sober, modest, and virtuous young woman. Neither had I yet any occasion to know what a temptation to wickedness meant. But that which I was too vain of was my ruin, for the lady in the house where I was had 2 sons, young gentlemen of very promising parts and of extraordinary behaviour. The eldest, a gay gentleman, began with that unhappy snare to all women, taking notice upon all occasions how pretty I was, as he called it. After he had thus baited his hook, he played an opener game, and one day, going by his sister's chamber when I was there doing something about dressing her, he comes in with an air of gaiety. "Oh, Mrs. Betty," said he to me. "How do you do, Mrs. Betty? Don't your cheeks burn, Mrs. Betty?" "What makes you talk so, brother?" says the lady. "Why," says he, "a great many fine things have been said of Mrs. Betty, and particularly that she is the handsomest young woman in Colchester." "I wonder at you, brother," says the sister. "Betty wants but one thing. If she had not money, she's nobody." Her young brother, who was by, cried out, "Hold, sister, you run too fast. I assure you, if I find a woman so accomplished, I would not trouble myself about the money." I thought it was time for me to withdraw and leave them, and I did so, but not so far but that I heard abundance of fine things said of myself, which served to prompt my vanity. Now, it happened one day that the elder brother came running upstairs towards the room where his sisters used to sit and work, and calling to them before he came in. I, being there alone, stepped to the door and said, "Sir, the ladies are not here." He was just got to the door, and clasping me in his arms, as if it had been by chance, "Oh, Mrs. Betty," says he, "are you here? That's better still. I want to speak with you more than I do with them." And then, having me in his arms, he kissed me 3 or 4 times. I struggled to get away, and yet did it but faintly neither, and he held me fast and still kissed me till he was almost out of breath, and then, sitting down, says, "Dear Betty, I am in love with you." His words, I must confess, fired my blood and put me into disorder enough. He repeated it afterwards several times, that he was in love with me, and my heart spoke as plain as a voice that I liked it. After this attack, though, it was not long but he found an opportunity to catch me again, and almost in the same posture. It was his younger sister's chamber that I was in, and as there was nobody in the house but the maids below stairs, he began to be in earnest with me indeed. Taking his advantage, he threw me down upon the bed and kissed me there most violently, but, to give him his due, offered no manner of rudeness to me. After this he puts 5 guineas into my hand, and went away downstairs. He comes up again in half an hour and falls to work with me again as before, only with a little less introduction. Stopping my very breath with kisses, he threw me upon the bed again. But then, being both well warmed, he went farther with me than decency permits me to mention. However, though he took these freedoms with me, it did not go to that which they call the last favour. When this was over, he stayed but a little while, but he put almost a handful of gold into my hand and left me. It will not be strange if I now began to think, but alas, I gave up myself to a readiness of being ruined without the least concern, and am a fair memento to all young women whose vanity prevails over their virtue. Indeed, I think I rather wished for that ruin than studied to avoid it. In the meantime, however, I was cunning enough not to give the least room to any in the family to suspect me, or to imagine that I had the least correspondence with this young gentleman. But as the devil is an unwearied tempter, so he never fails to find opportunity for that wickedness he invites to. It was one evening that I was in the garden when he found means to convey a note into my hand, by which he directed me to understand that he would, tomorrow, desire me publicly to go of an errand for him into the town, and that I should see him somewhere by the way. Accordingly, after dinner the next day, he gave me my errands, and when we were together he began to talk very gravely to me, and to tell me that he resolved to marry me as soon as he came to his estate, that in the meantime, if I would grant his request, he would maintain me very honourably. As he pressed me to speak, I told him I had no reason to question the sincerity of his love to me, but what, my dear? What if you should be with child? Is that not it? Why, then, says he, I'll take care of you. And, says he, here's an earnest for you. And with that, he pulls out a silk purse with 100 guineas in it. And I'll give you such another, says he, every year till I marry you. My colour came and went at the sight of the purse and with the fire of his proposal together, so that I could not say a word. And, putting the purse into my bosom, I made no more resistance to him, but let him do just what he pleased, and as often as he pleased. And thus I finished my own destruction at once. So we took our fill of our wicked pleasure for near half a year. And yet, which was the most to my satisfaction, I was not with child. But before this half-year was expired, his younger brother falls to work with me. And he, finding me alone in the garden one evening, begins a story of the same kind to me, and in short, he proposes, fairly and honourably, to marry me, and that before he made any other offer to me at all. I was now confounded. But here happened a circumstance which put me to my shifts, for this young gentleman, as he was plain and honest, was not so careful to make his having a kindness for Mrs. Betty a secret in the house. And at last I got information among the servants that I should, in a very little while, be desired to remove. After some time he took an opportunity to tell me that the kindness he had for me had got vent in the family, that it was true his father and mother might resent it, but that he was now in a way to live, and he did not fear maintaining me. I was now in a dreadful condition indeed, and I repented heartily my easiness with the eldest brother. Upon serious consideration, I resolved to tell the elder brother of the problem, and it was not long before I had an opportunity, and I told him I was afraid the ladies had got some secret information of our correspondence, for that it was easy to see that their conduct was very much changed towards me. He smiled when he heard all this. "Why, look you, child," says he, "that they are uneasy about you, that is true, but that they have the least suspicion of the case as it is, so far from being true that they suspect my brother Robin. This will be to your satisfaction." "So it is," says I, "one way, but this is not the chief thing that troubles me." And I told him how imprudently his brother had managed himself, and how far I had resisted him. "But," says I, "my case will be doubly hard, for as they carry it ill to me now, because he desires to have me, They'll carry it worse when they shall find I have denied him.